Well, it's the best day of the week. It always is the best day of the week on Friday here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, because that means it's time for the Morning Pitt Mailbag. We always look forward to this. You know what we do. We take questions all week long from the Pitt fans at Panther-Lair.com on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board there. Put up a post usually on Tuesday. Everybody posts all their questions, and then we answer as many as we can right here on the Morning Pit, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com on the Friday edition. So I always look forward to doing this. Like I say, it's my favorite episode of the Morning Pit to record each week, and I hope you enjoy it as well. I like when you guys pick the topics and give us something to talk about instead of me thinking of things, because like this week we talked about decommitments for 2 days, and we ranked the position groups for the other 2 days. So I look forward to this because it takes a little bit of the thinking off of me and puts it on you. And you guys have interesting things to talk about and interesting questions. So we got some great questions this week, as we always do. Let's jump into it. The Morning Pit Mailbag right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Friday edition of the Morning Pit here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, hanging out with you for a little bit of Pit conversation to get your day started. It's the mailbag edition of the Morning Pit, so what we do every Friday, take your questions and answer as many as we can right here on the Morning Pit. You know what we always ask you to do? Like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pit video content. Our daily Morning Pit videos, Monday through Friday. Our weekly live show we do every Wednesday night at 8:30, sometimes 8:45, but we try to shoot for 8:30 if we can. That's what we typically do, but occasionally you have a scheduling conflict. You got to move things around. We have post-game shows and interviews and press conferences and all kinds of video content right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you won't miss any of our Pit video content. All right, let's jump into it and get into some of the questions here, because we have great questions as always. Ohio Pete says, it's hard to phrase this, but I'll try. Do you foresee any players choosing not to play this coming season after training camp and then going into the transfer portal when it reopens after the season, thus preserving a year of eligibility? I mean, like that's almost an impossible thing to predict. You know, well, I guess for one thing, you have to narrow it down, right? Anybody who has already taken a red shirt, it's not going to make any sense for them to do that. They're not going to preserve a year of eligibility. So somebody like Derek Davis, right, who is a red shirt senior this year, I'm just picking a random guy. I'm not even like specifically thinking about Davis. It could be, I'm looking at the scholarship board right now. So it could be Juelz Goff. It could be Raphael Williams, Zion Fowler, Tyreek Robinson. Any of these guys who took a red shirt, it doesn't make any, you're not going to preserve a year of eligibility. You'd be talking about guys who haven't taken a red shirt. Desmond Reed has not taken a red shirt. Sincere Lee, Kenny Johnson, Malachi Thomas. These guys have not taken a red shirt. So they would be in the group of players for whom it would make sense to skip out on the year, preserve a year of eligibility if you want to go play somewhere else. Now, that's just establishing who would even qualify for this. You have a small group. You know, I mean, on offense, guys who have not redshirted: Cole Gonzalez, Desmond Reed, Sincere Lee, Kenny Johnson, Malachi Thomas, Justin Holmes, none of the offensive linemen. I mean, that's it. That's all of your guys on offense. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 potential players on offense. Defensively, you're looking at, Francis Brew, Jeremiah Marcelin, Rasheem Biles, Braylon Lovelace, and that's it. You know, of guys who have not already redshirted. Because again, if you've already redshirted, it doesn't make sense to do that. Now, so you're only looking at maybe a dozen guys who would be possibilities, unless you want to count the incoming freshmen, which, would they really make that decision at this point? So you're looking at a small group, and I would say it's probably unlikely for any of those guys to make that call. Maybe a transfer who just came in, maybe would decide to do it, but like, I just don't get it, and I just don't see it. I do think perhaps if that kind of thing were to happen, I don't think it would happen to be a decision made in training camp. I think it'd be a decision made in the first 4 games of the season, or at some point before those players play 4 games and, are on the verge of burning the opportunity for a redshirt. Kind of like what Rodney Hammond did last year. Rodney Hammond effectively opted out of the rest of the season after a couple games. Remember, he was suspended for the first four games, got reinstated ahead of the 5th game of the season, played sparingly here and there, and then basically opted out before he passed that redshirt threshold. So he preserved a year of eligibility, and now he's at Sacramento State or someplace. I think he's at Sacramento State with Brandon Marion. So, that scenario could unfold, but no, as I look down that list of guys who would even be candidates for it, there's nobody who jumps out that I'm like, oh yeah, watch out for that guy. He's probably going to sit out and try and take a red shirt. Nothing jumps out like that, but I mean, you would have to, I think, be pretty close to some of these guys for them to talk to you about, hey, I don't think I'm going to play this year. I think I'm just going to back out and, take a red shirt and transfer. So, no, but, stranger things, right? NC Panther 99 says, let's do a best case scenario. Say not a single starter on either side of the ball misses more than one game due to injury or otherwise. What's the floor and ceiling for this year's regular season football team? I say the floor is 9 and the ceiling is 11. That's interesting. Floor and ceiling, everybody stays healthy. I don't know if I could go so far as to say the floor is 9. I mean, I think we should all know that you never totally dismiss the possibility of a game being blown. They should be talented enough if everyone stays healthy to win 9 games. But I would say, the floor in that scenario where everybody stays healthy and everybody plays the full season, the floor would be 8. They would not sink below that. I would be shocked if they sunk below that. Now, a more likely outcome, if everybody stays healthy, is that they probably would win like 9 games. Is the ceiling 11? Sure. They were well on their way last year. They were well on their way toward 9, 10, 11 wins. Maybe 9 or 10 would probably be the most likely outcome after the 7-0 start. You go back to 2021 where they went 10-2. That I guess that Western Michigan game is sort of the example of the blowing a game. Like I said, they would make the floor 8, but the reality is that they were right there on the cusp. I mean, they did win 10, and they were on the cusp of winning 11 and potentially 12 with that Miami game. So I don't think this team is necessarily that team. I don't think they have a Biletnikoff Award winner or Heisman Trophy finalist on this year's team, but I do think, if everybody stays healthy, sure, I think there's a path to 10, 11 wins. So I would say, you said floor 9, ceiling 11. I would probably say floor 8, ceiling 11, with the most likely outcome being 8, 9, maybe 10 wins. Even with everybody staying healthy all season long, I don't know if I would sit here and say that I expect Pitt to win 11 or something like that. I think 10 is probably about as good as it's going to get. So maybe I guess I'm saying the ceiling is 10 and not 11. But so you said 9 to 11. Maybe I would say 8 to 10, I guess, because I think even with everyone healthy, there are still some holes and question marks on this team that I don't know. Where health is not the only concern that I have. So I guess maybe I would adjust a little bit. You say 9 floor. Floor of 9, ceiling of 11. I would probably say floor of 8, ceiling of 10. And 9 wins would be a good season. 10 wins would obviously be a very good season. So I guess we're pretty close on our numbers there, but I would shade a little bit lower. Pocono Panther says, Chris Pitt does have several openings in out-of-conference scheduling for the rest of the decade. We've only played Temple once since they were voted out of the Big East. It's natural geographically, and Pitt does have a good number of graduates from other parts of the state. And recently we've landed several recruits from the Philly area and suburbs. I'd like to see a football home and away scheduled and also a basketball series as well. Thoughts? Yeah, I'm not sure why Temple doesn't get considered as a non-conference game. Looking ahead, 2026, they've got Miami of Ohio, UCF, and Wisconsin. So they're really just looking for an FCS game there. But 2027, they only have 2 non-conference games on the books right now, Wisconsin and UConn. So you get an FCS game and then one other Temple would be a good fit there. 2028, they have 2 non-conference games scheduled, UConn on the road and Notre Dame. So, you have 2 more that you're going to add, an FCS and probably another G5 team. Temple would be a fit there as well. 2029, they have their non-conference schedule in place with Delaware, West Virginia, at UCF and Richmond. 2030, they've got at West Virginia and Toledo. Temple would fit in on any of these. I don't think there's any question about it. These years when you have one power conference team scheduled, supplement with Temple. Temple seems like a good option. I don't think it's a terrible candidate for a home-and-home series. We've talked many times about the value or lack thereof in going on the road and facing a non-power conference team on the road in the non-conference schedule. Whether Pitt should or should not do it, I've sort of said that it's a necessary evil. You can't afford to just pay everybody to come here all the time. You're going to have to go on the road every now and then, and pretty much everybody does go on the road every now and then. Some schools more often than others, but everybody plays one of these non-conference games on the road against a non-power conference opponent. So there's no real shame in that. But I think, I don't hate Temple as an option. If you told me I could, I could see Pitt play a home and home against UConn or Temple. Sure, give me Temple. Everybody will drive out to Philly, or everybody could drive out to Philly. It's certainly easier to get to than Connecticut, and more pleasant to be in than Connecticut. So sure, give me the home and home with Temple as opposed to UConn. Give me a home and home with Temple as opposed to Akron. Give me a home and home with Temple as opposed to Kent State or some other place, or Marshall or something like that. Sure, keep it in state. Go to Philly. It'd be fun. It'd be a fun little trip. I'm not opposed to that at all. I don't know if there's a good reason for it. Maybe Temple has sworn off playing against any non-conference games against former Big East teams that voted them out of the Big East. I'd have to look at Temple's non-conference schedules and see if they ever played, Syracuse or Rutgers or West Virginia or, on and on. But I'd be on board with it. I would, at least. For whatever that's worth, which is not much. Diehard Panther says, which true freshman and redshirt freshman will make the biggest impact this season? That's always an interesting question. It's always a fun one to dig into. I think when you look at true freshmen, I think the running backs are on the table. Jaylen Brown, Saquon Smith, Ja'Karian Turner. As we've talked about, there's not a lot of depth at the running back position. Desmond Reed and Juelz Goff with Derek Davis sort of on the sideline, and who knows when he's going to be back. There's the walk-on that came in as a wide receiver and moved to running back. He's a candidate, but I think some of the freshmen could have an opportunity here. I think Ja'Karian Turner impressed during spring camp. Just Saquon Smith and Jaylen Brown came in June, so maybe Turner could get an opportunity out there. I think the 3 freshman wide receivers who all were here in spring could have an opportunity as well. There's more depth there. They have 7 upperclassmen wide receivers on scholarship, but I think Tony Kinsler, Cam Sapp, and Bryce Yates are going to get an opportunity. I think they look good in spring camp, and I think you could see them on the field. Max Hunt might have an opportunity at tight end. I don't know. That it kind of depends on what Justin Holmes and Jake Overman and Malachi Thomas do. But I would probably be looking at the wide receivers a lot and at least one of the running backs, not to mention the possibility of Mason Heinchel. I think we can't close the door on that. And I'm not even going to get into a discussion about the ACC Media Day situation. You can check out the message boards. We have a long conversation about that on there. But look, Mason Heinchel got a lot of praise this spring. A lot. The kind of praise we haven't heard about a true freshman probably in about 8 years. So I can't rule it out. Defensively, as far as true freshmen, I'm not sure you'll see too many of these guys contribute. I think Sean Lee might have a chance at cornerback, but there's a lot of upperclassmen at cornerback. Otherwise, these guys should be pretty well set on redshirting. And then redshirt freshman, Tyreek Robinson is going to have an opportunity to contribute at wide receiver. The offensive linemen, I think, are still kind of down the depth chart. Giovanni Cooley and Caleb Holmes and Mason Lindsay. On defense, as far as redshirt freshmen, I think Jasir Whittington's going to be in the rotation at defensive tackle, and he's going to play a lot and make an impact. I think Cameron Lindsay will be a backup at linebacker, and he'll play a lot. And then cornerback, they could make a two deep out of upperclassmen with Rashad Battle and Rashawn Murray and Tamon Lineman, Shadarian Harrison. But they brought in Zion Ferguson as a transfer from UNC. They got Nigel Maynard and Davion Pritchard, who both look pretty interesting as redshirt freshman corners. I think those guys will have a chance. And then Alan Bryant, the safety, I think will push for a spot in the rotation and push for some playing time. I think he'll have a brighter future down the road, and probably the same with the corners. But there's a lot of praise. These guys have impressed the coaches, and I think they're going to get an opportunity here. So biggest impacts out of a true freshman or a redshirt freshman, I think for true freshmen, you're looking at running backs and receivers. For redshirt freshmen, you're probably looking at the defensive tackle Jasir Whittington and the linebacker Cameron Lindsay. I think those are probably the guys I would be keeping my eye on the most if I'm looking for true freshmen and redshirt freshmen who are going to make an impact this year. Let's see here. Pap45 says, given the new 105 scholarship limit, what would be the logic behind not signing a higher volume of players in positions like offensive line and defensive line within reason? The only thing I can figure is you would have to pay them. O-line has struggled for the majority of the last decade, and D-line has had individual studs but been inconsistent overall. Considering how critical the line of scrimmage is, I would attack it with numbers. Yeah, I don't know. It'd be an interesting conversation to sit down and talk to Pat Narduzzi about, or Doug Whaley about, or anyone kind of in a position to make some of those decisions. I'm not sure what would be the rationale for not really loading up, even more so than they've done the last few years, where they signed 4 offensive linemen each of the last few classes. I think you make an interesting point about paying. You are going to have to pay those guys. Some of your budget is going to go to those guys, whether NIL or revenue sharing or both. And so maybe there is a financial issue. Maybe the university put a limit on some of the scholarships. You can't actually give out 105 scholarships. You have to keep it a little bit limited. I don't know if that's the case, but I mean, how much are we paying out here? I could see that question being asked. So maybe that's part of it, and not just we don't have the budget to pay all these guys, but if we bring in 5-6 linemen, how many of them are going to be here in a year? So are we going to pay them to be here for a year, to redshirt, just to get coached up and develop in the strength program, and then they leave? And so what did we get for that money? Like, what was the return on investment there? Now, there might come a point, and it might come very soon, where that's just viewed as the cost of doing business. Well, you pay guys that aren't going to play for you, and you hope that most of them stick around long enough to actually get on the field and contribute. But maybe for right now, that's not necessarily the perspective. I also think you could see the approach to recruiting evolve and develop over the next few years, where what they're doing now or how they're approaching it right now is not necessarily what they're going to do next year, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. It's not how they're going to approach it or how they're going to handle some of these decisions. I think you could see that change. So that's going to be interesting to watch. I don't know though, unless they just feel like, we got the number of guys that we need. I think they've under-recruited the lines a decent amount over the last couple of years, and there were complicating factors along the way there with super seniors and this and that, but I don't think there's a lot of harm in taking a bunch of linemen and then seeing which ones shake out and how many actually can play. Because, as we've often said, or as I've often said, I think offensive line and quarterback are the two most difficult positions to project accurately from the high school level to the college level. I think it's hard to project from the college level to the NFL level. You look at the number of quarterbacks who bust and don't pan out and don't live up to expectations. I think it's the hardest position to project at that level, and I think it's even more difficult when you're talking about 17 or 18-year-olds projecting to college. So, and I think the offensive line is just as challenging as the quarterback position in terms of projecting guys and getting a feel for how they're going to, again, develop and adjust to that next level. It's not easy. It's not easy. So there's some value, I think, in taking more guys than you need, or attacking it with numbers, like you said, which is one of my personal favorite phrases. Like I always say, Friday is my personal favorite day, not just because it's Friday and the end of the week, but because it is the Morning Pitt Mailbag, and we appreciate everybody who submitted questions for the mailbag this week. Don't forget, you can submit your questions at Panther-Lair.com every week. We put up the thread on Tuesday and take questions and answer as many as we can here on the Friday Morning Pitt Mailbag. So make sure you locked into Panther-Lair.com for all the Pitt sports news, and then like this video and subscribe right here at YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for watching today. Thanks for watching the videos all week. I hope you've had a great week. I hope you have a great weekend. We will catch up with you on Monday morning. Lots of Pitt stuff to talk about, I'm sure, right here on the Morning Pitt, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.